First off, the thing that I always do, even if it kind of bores my audience, is I spend the first few seconds saying thank you to all of my guests, because I know what it's like as a content creator having to take time out of our day. We need to be somewhat selective because we get so many DMs, and it just means a lot that you took the time to do this. So I just first off want to say thank you.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
And the second thing that I love to do is just allow people to give a self-introduction, because online we create, reels and shorts and TikToks that like create sort of a definition of who we are in even a 40-second clip. And it's easy for other people just to decide on a quick reputation of who we are and what we do. So if I were to ask you to come in and speak to, let's say, a high school business class I was teaching, I said, here's the mic. You have a few seconds to introduce yourself. What's your sort of like elevator pitch, at least how you woke up today in terms of how you define yourself?
Yeah, I mean, thinking through that lens, we become so much of our environment and our upbringing and the things we've been through and who our parents were and who they weren't. And when you're going through it, you don't realize it. So, looking back on, my upbringing, watching my dad as an entrepreneur, make tons of money, lose tons of money. I got a unique experience of seeing that climbing this mountain into the top 0.01% is possible. And I also got to see how fragile it is and that it can all go away in an instant. So that really shaped my outcome and why I do the things I do in my life. And I grew up as an athlete. And then once that dream was over, it was a very difficult transition for me because I'm so competitive. So college just didn't work out for me. There was nothing there. I was not going to fit into any type of traditional mold. So I went into sales mode and taking that competitive edge as an athlete growing up and making that my main life. Competing for your income is the ultimate sport. So that's where I found my niche, and sales really saved my life. And I can say that making that transition from leaving college and what I thought my life was supposed to be, and leaving that friction and going towards the path less traveled is really what saved my life.
Love this first question, because I think it's something that a lot of people feel like journalists use or something when they don't know who the heck the guest is. The reason I love it, and this was just a perfect example, is you mentioned things like that pathless path that another friend of mine just created a book on that topic. Like, how do we figure out what our actual path is? Because it's going to be individualized. You mentioned being a former athlete and the fact that your dad was an entrepreneur. And in doing my research, of course, I knew a lot of that. But the thing about your dad wasn't something that I had really thought about. And I'd love to hear more, because a lot of people don't have that generational learning from their parents. They're often trying to break out of that mold. And I'm sure a lot of the people that you create content for, their parents might be telling them not to go take those risks. So that's a really interesting, unique thing. And I'd love to hear more about what your dad did and some of those things that you learned from watching him as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, he was him and my uncle were the first entrepreneurs in our family tree that reached high levels of success like that. And the middle class mindsets, they don't just go away. So even though my dad was very successful and was reaching levels that our family had never seen, there were still middle class mindsets that were ingrained, that were passed on to me. So I learned taking risks and, everything that comes along with that, the rewards and also the failures. But I also had this piece that came with me, thinking that $1,000 is a lot of money. You get your first 1,000 or your first 5,000, you want to protect it. And, and the reality is that when you don't have a lot is when you should be risking it all. You can always go make another $5,000, but if you don't risk that 5,000 on your dream, it's never going to happen. So I had to work through that personally, and it took a lot of time. I had a very small lid on money potential and what a lot of money was. And fast forward now, 15 years later, and I'm a hedge fund manager, and we're dealing with millions and millions of dollars. We're having $1 billion conversations. I wish I could go back and go through this process again without feeling the anxiety of losing small amounts of money, right? It paralyzed my growth because I was so scared and I wanted to protect the small amounts of success I gained in the beginning, which when you start making 100 grand for the first time, you crack the six figures and you're able to save $15,000 in a year, you want to hold on to that for dear life, when in reality, you need to redeploy and make that 100 go to 200 and then redeploy it again to 5. I mean, everybody wants to be an investor with small amounts of money, when really you should be investing it all back into yourself so you can earn big chunks of money and then go be an investor. So I wish I could go back and teach my 20-year-old self what I know now at 36.
Don't we all? That's one of those great open-ended conversations, right? Questioning, what would you do to 5-year-old self? What would you say to your 10-year-old self, 20-year-old self? When it comes to your ability to learn that, though, that's not an easy thing. Are there books? Were there courses? Did you hire mentors? Like, what did you feel was your path to starting to unblock some of those money mindsets?
In the beginning, it was definitely books, audiobooks, podcasts that got me thinking in the right direction. And that's how I became great at sales in my first career, was through all the sales books, learning the mindset, callousing the mind and your capacity to work around the clock when everybody just wants you to go to the bar, So in the beginning, it was breaking all the friend society expectations. And for a long time, I did not go to masterminds. I did not seek out mentors. And that really stunted my growth because I was I read every book there was about investing, sales. And then what I didn't realize in that process was that everything is relationships. So it's going to move your needle is relationships and the people that you know that can take you to the next level. You can learn everything there is about private equity, but if you don't know somebody with a deal or somebody that can give you access to the inside of a deal, all the knowledge is worthless, right? So I had all this knowledge I was gaining, and I was stuck making $300,000 a year for the first 10 years of my career because I wasn't getting into the rooms where people can shorten your learning curve. That was the most monumental shift in my growth, is when I started going to masterminds, I started going to events, I started putting myself in the room with the people that could accelerate the curve. And then, within a year of doing that, I went to a 7-figure income. So the power of proximity is by far the most important thing. And it's also the most intimidating, because when you've never been in a room like that, and first of all, you got to put up the money. It might be 5 grand, it might be 10, might be 15 grand just to get in the room. But if you're in a room of 15, a tight room of 15 people, and the net worth is $500 million, how much are you going to learn in that room, right? What connections are going to be presented to you because you were in the room? So if you can get over that intimidation and just go do it anyways, it will be the most valuable thing that you can do, is just getting around people that have already done it.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the intimidation comes from this idea that they won't let me in the room. It's literally like the high school cafeteria style table where there's cliques and people feel like they aren't going to be welcome. And of course, you mentioned the idea that you can sort of pay to play and you just continue to work your way in there. When you had originally said the thoughts of reinvesting in yourself, and you kind of pointed at yourself because it was like, instead of just putting that money to grow on its own, deploying our cash as soldiers to go grow more. But you said yourself, which really stood out to me, and it made me think of a conversation I had on this show previously with Hugh Davies, who has a financial literacy YouTube channel, and he talks a lot about investing and things like this. And I told him on that show something that I would rather not talk about. But the first time that I started growing money, my plan was to take that money and then afford myself the ability to go full time with this show. I had like crazy success in traditional stocks, but as a consumer investor, very quickly grew like 20K to 100K, which I would never make a YouTube video being like, this is how you do it, because I didn't know anything that I was doing. And then quickly that 100K became 40K. So he was like, yeah, don't do that, basically. But I love the fact that you pointed towards yourself and said, taking that money to redeploy it. So if we could talk about that a bit more, I already know, don't do what I did. But What do you mean? Like if somebody, because realistically, let's say they have more like that initial 20K or 10K, they're probably not starting with 100 or 300. So speaking to those people who are able to make 10 somehow, they could do that refurbishing furniture or selling on Amazon. Doesn't really matter, but they get there. How do they redeploy those soldiers?
Yeah. So a prerequisite to wanting to do this is you have to not have the shiny object syndrome when Robinhood offers you a free 5 cent stock, or Acorn says you can round up the charges and invest that way. So if you get sucked into investing pennies, you're never going to make millions, right? So you need to know that all of the real, if you want to be a real investor on the inside, private placement, private equity, where the big monster returns are, real estate, all this stuff, the syndications, there's a barrier to entry. And you have to be an accredited investor, which means if you're a single person, you have to make $200,000 a year to even be qualified by the SEC to invest in real products. If you're married, it's $300,000, or you got to have $1 million net worth. So just knowing that you can't even get into the game until you reach those levels, all of your funds should be reinvested into your own skills, whatever it is. Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it just I need to spend money on more leads? Whatever is going to get your income to the level that gets you accredited, that's goal number one. You have no business, if you want to be a real investor, putting money into the stock market or anything else, crypto, any of this small time stuff. That is going to stunt your growth. It's going to make you think small because you think 5, 10, 20 grand is worth investing. That needs to go back into yourself so that you can become a higher level individual that can play in the real space, because the minimums in the private placement world are 100,000. If you don't have 100,000 to deploy on one deal, it's not time to invest.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Where were you 2.5 years ago?
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That makes a ton of sense. And then so that goes into that idea of building your entrepreneurial skills more at the forefront, whether you're selling a service or products, or as you said, in sales, which I think that's an interesting one that comes up less frequently on this show. Certainly we've talked about sales, but it's such a massive topic. So when you say that off the cuff of sales, what do you mean?
So with sales, there's a couple things, right? You need to get great at sales. If you're going to be in sales, you need to be the best, right? So the first thing that I would do is wherever you're selling right now, whatever product you're selling, you need to understand that sales is sales. Like if you can sell real estate, you can sell food. Like I sold food for 12 years and now I'm selling hedge fund products, right? One, it has nothing to do with one another. So sales is sales. You want to become great at sales and then be honest about the vehicle you're in. Don't stay in a vehicle too long that isn't going to get you to where you need to be. If you're selling cell phones, you can probably only make 70, 80 grand a year, right? So whatever you're doing, find out who the top guy is. What do they make? Where does this thing cap out? And then be honest with yourself. Is this vehicle going to take me to where I want to go? And then the second part of that is if it's not going to take you to where you're going to go, are you good enough to go to a vehicle that's going to take you to where you're going to go? So if not, be honest with yourself, lean into that vehicle, become the best at it. When you're the top guy, then it's time to go look for the next product that's a higher ticket, right? So I went from selling $1,000 to $10,000 products, and that's where I deserve to be. I needed to forge the skills. Once I was the top sales guy and I was the best in the company and the industry, I was capped out, couldn't make any more money. So now I went to $100,000 plus high ticket. Now I'm doing the same work. Actually, I'm doing a lot less work, and I'm making 10 times the commissions because I found a better vehicle. So this is a progression of being honest with yourself, auditing your skills, audit where you are in the food chain, right? Self-awareness is what kills everybody. Everybody thinks they deserve more than where they are, and they don't want to put in the effort it's going to take to get there. And if you can find the self-awareness barometer of where I am, where I deserve to be, and where I'm going, and you can play that game perfectly with yourself, sky's the limit.
I'd love to help people build the framework for that self-awareness report card when it comes to sales. But first, I'll tell a quick story from myself. And that's when I first started as a professional, I guess, after playing college football, I went into personal training, the fitness industry. That's what I'd done in university. It was kind of my background, this health sciences stuff. And I loved it. And I set sales records at that first gym that I was working at. And people would often come to me and be like, can you come talk to our sales team at this location or these kinds of conversations? And I'd say, sure, but I don't really know what I'm going to tell them because to me, a lot of the things that ended up being sales that I can look at in hindsight was somewhat intuitive. Like I didn't really have a playbook that I could be like, here's the bullet point of things I do. I don't know what the heck I did. It was like my first months working in quote unquote sales and all of a sudden was doing like 50K in a month. And I was like, I just thought that's what everyone did. I didn't really know that that wasn't common. The other thing is that people always, often, and almost always quit that industry because they were like, I just hate sales. If I could come do this job, but not have to sell, then I would like it. At the time, I kind of knew what they were saying and I could feel it a bit. But looking back, I'm like, well, that's just ridiculous because if you're selling something you believe in, then you're going to make way more money as opposed to just having somebody else make the sales and then you do the work. Like you're just asking for a job because of the awkwardness, I guess, or the intimidation, as you said earlier, of being quote unquote a salesperson. Like people say, I'm not a salesperson. So common. And anyhow, if we were to like make that report cards that people could have self-awareness when it comes to sales, what are those skills that they should be auditing? What are things that people should really work on?
Yeah, I mean, I learned this from Gary Brecka. Well, I already knew this, but hearing it from him, the frequency of authenticity is the most powerful sales tool there is, right? And how are you going to be authentic if you don't know your product inside and out? How are you going to be authentic if you don't show up really trying to help people, right? So this is, when you doubt your ability to sell or to sell, it's because you haven't put in the time to learn your industry, to learn your product, to really be able to, with authenticity, recommend the solution to whoever you're in front of, right? Like when I get in a room, this is me. Like I don't need to think about my product. I've already looked at the competition. I know I'm offering the best solution for them. If you don't feel that way, you're going to feel awkward. You're going to feel gross about it. And you should, because what it means is you didn't put in the time and effort required to show up with authenticity. So you got to be able to go through that. And in the beginning, it's about the reps. Like when I first started as a hedge fund manager, I knew that I was new. I had a new product. I studied like crazy. But the first thing I did was I hired VAs to schedule a ton of meetings with people who weren't qualified, right? Because I wasn't trying to make sales. I was trying to practice and become excellent at my craft, right? So how many of you salespeople out there are willing to intentionally fail for the first month and do 100 pitches, 1,000, whatever your product is, just so that you can get well-versed in what you do and then show up for someone who's actually a qualified prospect?
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I can often do is like put myself kind of into the mind of the listener and the audience, because of course, from creating the show, I know a lot of how they think and what they think, and I get feedback in person. It's been really interesting, and I love talking about this point when I'm on other shows or something, is that it's really hard for experts and gurus and people with a lot of wisdom in any industry to think of the types of questions that true beginners would ask. And so one thing, it's funny, it's almost like I need to be super awkward and authentic on this show to ask the right questions sometimes, because I know that it can bring a lot of value. But when we live in that expert world, it's like, why the heck are you asking this? At the risk of being too basic, I would love to ask if somebody wanted to get started in sales. A lot of times they think of like MLMs or, maybe going door to door, selling Tupperware or Girl Guide cookies. They don't maybe even know where to get started. Would you recommend like just looking for companies that are hiring salespeople? Like literally take me to you're mentoring, your 18-year-old nephew who wants to go into trying sales. Like what the heck do they do?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because I get it all the time. And I have different advice on this depending on what moment in time we're in. Right now, when people ask me that, I tell them solar, right? Solar's hot. I know several kids in their 20s that reached out to me. One was a personal trainer making like 50K. What do I do? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, move to Florida, move to Arizona somewhere and just get a solar job. I know there's people making 7 figures selling solar. you got a super high ceiling, just get involved, right? And solar is going to be one of those things where you're going to have to go door knock, you're going to have to face a ton of rejection and build the thick skin and the muscle required to be successful in this industry. So it's really, I mean, I've seen at my food company that my dad and I had, I mean, for every one salesperson we'd retain, we'd go through 100. And you just have to, going in, know those odds and percentages. And what it takes is just not quitting. Because in the beginning, it's going to suck for all of us. How are you going to be good at something you've never done? So I think showing up with the willingness to be awful and know it's going to be awful and be able to compartmentalize that is what's required to grow and become good at something. If you can just have the stamina and the personal quality to not quit, I would say go get into a door knocking role at a solar company. You might only be generating the leads in the beginning, but that's how if you don't have leads, you can't make sales. Leads are more important than sales skills. Let's be serious, right? So if you can become excellent at prospecting and generating leads, that is the gateway to being a great salesperson.
Mm-hmm. And continue to level up from there, I suppose. Again, bringing your dad up and the company that you guys had together, what was that company? You said food, but what was it specifically?
Yeah, it was called Heartland Foods. It was an organic food delivery service. So we sold frozen foods from farms, and we would sell them in bulk in 6-month increments. So there'd be a freezer attached to that if they didn't have one. We also sold grills, cutlery, cookware, water systems, air purifiers, all kinds of health and wellness products and cooking related products. And when I dropped out of college, I did it because I was in my 5th year and I was still lost. And that summer I went into direct sales. I was working in the warehouse in high school and college, packing orders. Then I was doing deliveries, and I saw what those sales guys were making, and I saw it as a legitimate path. I had no confidence in myself. I was terrified. If you could have seen me in the beginning, you'd be like, anyone can do it, because I was horrible. And the only difference between me and a bunch of my buddies in college came onto the team. Only difference between me and all of them is I just wouldn't quit. That was it. So my first goal was, I went to the top sales guy in the company. I was like, how do you do it? He's like, well, everybody works 5 days a week. I work on Saturday, so I'm working 6 days a week, which means more frequency. And he's like, and I read self-development books, right? And I'm like, oh, how often do you do it? He's like, I do like 1 a month. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to catch this guy and pass him, I need to work 7 days a week, right? So again, I'm fully committed. I don't care. Like, everything else is secondary to my success at this point. I was going to make it work. And I did. I worked 7 days a week. I'd go 3 months at a time without a day off, because I don't see the point of taking a vacation on the weekend when I haven't achieved my goal yet. Mm-hmm. Like I'll take my vacation when I hit my goal. And this is the type of mentality you're going to have if you're going to be successful like this. So yeah, I became the top salesperson at the company, and then I was looking around the whole industry, and then I set all the industry records, and then I started building a team, and we built that company up to over 10 million in gross annual sales, and we saw an opportunity to exit because the pandemic just blew the company up. Everybody was in the delivery space, and overnight, it was not the plan at all to sell it. I thought this was going to be my career. And overnight, we're selling the company. I got to go figure out what I'm going to do next. And that's when my success went to a whole new level, because I was forced to go out and network and meet new people and figure out what's going on in the marketplace. And that's how I discovered that I could still lean into my sales skill set, do it with a much higher level product. And the conversations are more fun, the people are higher level, and we make a lot more money. So in a way, you can look at, I spent 12, 15 years staying too small.
Right. Before we move too far from sales, because I know there's like a ton of things that you have a background in and some different connections that, really connect to, I guess, your life's work. But if we were to make a blog post, let's say, and you're like, okay, these are the 5 things that you need to do to be good at sales. You mentioned authenticity that you learned from Gary Brecka being one of them. If we made that bullet point or a thread for X or whatever Twitter's called now, what would be some of those, like just those few other things that might be valuable for people to go learn about?
Yeah, the most valuable things that I got out of sales books, sales gurus want to give you the tactics, the questions, tie downs, right? Like the difference between saying like, "Do you want the product?" versus "You want the product, don't you?" Right? That commands a yes. Learning how to ask questions that lead to the desired result is a very, very key principle, but it needs to be on that prospects' terms, right? Not that we're forcing them into anything. We're just asking them questions that lead them to a space where it's easy for them to make a decision to buy. That's a huge principle. Um, yeah, I had another good one and I just forgot. Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is, I think the difference between the sales pro and the regular salesperson is whatever the things are, the sticking points, the objections, the things that you hope don't come up that you want to run from, you have to build that into your presentation. You need to be the one to bring it up and squash it before it comes up.
Hmm.
Any objection in your process that's going to happen in your process should be part of the presentation. We don't hide from the elephant in the room. We bring it up in a way that we can handle it correctly and move on because it's going to come up anyways. Salespeople that hide from the problems don't close a lot of sales. People really respect the truth and the downside and how we're going to get past it.
Yeah, that's powerful. I feel like you just jogged my memory with the quote of "we can connect the dots only looking backwards." And when, again, I think back to my time in sales, like specific sales as opposed to maybe informal sales, which is what I'm in now, because we all are human and we all sell. But back to those days working in the gym, I feel like that was something that I probably did a lot of because I just knew what would be objections to hiring a personal trainer long term. Again, for me, it came from a genuine, authentic place because I know that people would rather go buy a nice car or, a super fancy television or new watch instead of paying a quarter of that to go exercise. Like which is just wild when you think about it from a helicopter view. Bringing up things like that long before anybody was bringing up objections was probably something that was. You also mentioned books, the term books, and I'm sure there's resources in general. You said watching videos earlier. Are there ones, whether it's in personal development and self-help or sales specific, business specific, that you can recall like by name if somebody were going to go look some up themselves?
Yeah, the sales books, and this isn't just a principle of whatever topic you want to dive into. You want to have mentors and reverse mentors. Like I want to read all the perspectives and figure out what fits my personality. There is not one way for someone to sell. Like some people are going to listen to Grant Cardone's very aggressive sales style and vibe with that. It just wasn't me. So I moved on to things like Jeffrey Gitomer's The Sales Bible. Love that book. That really helped me lean into the way that I sell, which is a no pressure relationship based sale. So a lot of this is back to that self-awareness, right? Testing, reading, does this fit me? How do I feel about the information? Can I implement it? Because if it's not you, it's not you. So yeah, that was a great book. The Ultimate Sales Machine is another great one. Man, just there's so many. I think the Psychology of Selling by Brian Tracy is foundational. That's the first one I would start with. It's the psychology side of it all, and then the mechanics too. It's a two-part book, but yeah, you got to have those basics drilled in. Understand how psychology works, right? People doubt what you say, but they're going to believe what they say. So, like, I'm never going to make a statement if I can ask a question that gets the prospect to say it, right? You got two ears and one mouth for a reason, right? I am always auditing that they are talking more than I am. Right. And if they're not, I'm going to ask more questions to force them to communicate and talk through it. If you find yourself in a situation where you're just, telling it instead of selling it, you're going to lose. So it's at the end of the day, it's a relationship. It always is. That's what makes the sale. So it's however you figure out how to connect with that person and get them the result they want, but they have to feel great about you and the result. If you get somebody the desired result, but they don't like you. I mean, I've walked away from great products because I just didn't like the guy and I didn't want to work with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the intuition as a consumer and someone who believes in themselves. I feel like a lot of people don't make that decision because they don't believe in themselves. This is a really meta moment for me right now because I don't often talk about myself on this show. I mean, of course, it's nice to have some dialogue back and forth. Like if I look at the two tracks, it's like maybe like 10% of the time or whatever, 20% of the time. But I'm really reflecting right now because, again, back to this thought of being strong in sales. And one thing that I grew up being pretty good at was coaching. I've always been a teacher. I'm a traditional teacher by trade. And a lot of people ask me for parenting advice. And then this podcast. And in all four of those worlds, that's exactly what I would advise people is to make sure that if you did document or track your time talking, and for some people, especially in like an actual field like teaching, if they were really struggling, I'd be like, well, actually monitor it. Like record a lesson for 60 minutes and be like, are you talking for 55 of them? Because no shit, the people aren't paying attention and aren't learning anything. So that's really interesting because I feel like there's connections to coaching and teaching, parenting for sure, any sort of mentorship. You mentioned self-awareness, which all of this is built on top of, I suppose. When it comes to the hustle mentality, though, you referenced working 7 days a week, working 30 days straight without taking a break. I know that if people have crazy goals, they have to have crazy schedules that lead to that, of course. But how do you juggle things like family or wellness and stuff into that as well?
Yeah, I did. I did 75 hard. Are you familiar with that?
I am, yeah. But why don't you give the summary for people who aren't?
Yeah, so 75 hard is 75 days. It's not a challenge, it's more of a program. You got to do two 45-minute workouts. One of them has to be outside, no matter what the weather is, right? You got to drink a gallon of water. You've got to do a journal. What else am I missing? It's been a while since I did it, but you got to follow a diet, no alcohol. There's a lot of parameters here. And if you miss one element one day of the challenge, you got to start over, right? So this is a forging of discipline, right? And I wanted to do it because I felt like I had reached my capacity limit. And every time I feel like that, there's always another gear. There's always another level. And oftentimes, by putting more on your plate, all of a sudden, those things that take an hour, you can get done in 15 minutes, right? And pushing your capacity in discipline is something that's built. And I remember going into 75 hard. This was like 2 years ago. I was working real hard, right? But this forced me to compress everything. So now I was getting a lot more done. And don't get me wrong, there were tough days where it was like, well, I got a packed schedule. If I don't get up at 3 a.m., these two workouts aren't happening, right? Or I worked 16 hours yesterday and did 75 hard. I didn't meal prep, and now all of a sudden I'm meal prepping for the next day at midnight, getting up again at 3 a.m. And the whole time going through that, I kept saying to myself, David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. Like there are other books that remind me of what I'm doing feels hard, but it's not. I'm not in a war zone. I haven't been, it's not hard. You have to be able to brainwash yourself positively to find the next level, to find the next gear. And that's just a constant progression in life. I don't think it ever ends.
So do you get a lot of sleep now?
I get more sleep now than I ever have. Yeah. But it's interesting, right? There's phases of life, right? Like I know in certain periods, like when I was starting this up last year, brand new industry, I knew it was going to take me 6 months of doing nothing but grinding to get to a certain place. And now it's like, okay, I can still produce, I can still meet all my responsibilities, and I can sleep 8 hours a night, right? So back to the self-awareness, what phase are you in? Have you put in that grunt work to deserve to sleep 8 hours? Mm-hmm. There are going to be periods, like it's never going to be linear. It's phases and being honest with yourself, and you can get a lot accomplished in a shorter period of time if you are actually all in on it.
I'm a huge fan of the Mamba mentality, which it sounds like you learned from that initial salesperson at the company you had with your dad. The idea that if you put in the 7 days instead of 6 or 2 workouts a day instead of 1, you're just going to continue to not only gain on people, but then pass them. And then it'll get to the point where they can't even catch up. And I know Arnold's famous too for saying that I realized if I sleep 7 hours instead of 8 in a year, I'm getting 365 more hours that I can compete with my competition, things like that. But I do feel, putting life in perspective when some of us go through health troubles or things like this, you start to realize like, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't pull 2 all-nighters in a row to make sure that I get this video uploaded. Like maybe if I went to bed, I could have still been able to get there. It might have been the whole, what we can accomplish in 10 years is way more than 10 months and way more than 10 days kind of thing. But, there's some reality there to stay grounded in. So I appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned the idea of when you go through tough things, whether it's 75 hard or the fact that you mentioned being an athlete. What did you learn from being an athlete that has really helped you with kind of stealing all of this mindset and all of these abilities to achieve goals?
So I played hockey, and I know sports are a little different now than they were 15, 20 years ago, but the biggest thing that I learned from hockey was being physically and mentally intimidated and getting through those feelings. A coach yelling at you, a player on the other team talking trash, like all these things that affect you so much when you haven't built a thicker skin yet. I think going through all that really helped me, and not making the team. Having to suffer a loss when you worked all summer for one moment and then it doesn't work out. And again, feeling that awful feeling of loss and not allowing yourself to sit in the negativity for more than 24 hours and getting back to work. That's a big principle that I've seen in many people's lives. And this is something you got to work on. Again, you're auditing how you feel and what you're going through. If I sit in something for more than 24 hours, it's officially my fault, right? Bad things are going to happen. And when they happen, it's going to feel like crap. But, if you stew in it, if you stay in it and you prolong it, that's on you, right? So, it's hard to be successful. It's hard to take losses. It's hard either way. So you have to just develop an ability to be unemotional to where the swings are and just execute, right? How I feel and how I show up are completely different things. And that's a skill that definitely came from ups and downs as an athlete, and then just got stronger dealing with, making big sales and then they cancel. Long drive to someone's house and they don't even show up for the appointment. Then you're on a sales streak. You sell 20 in a row. You're on cloud nine. And I'm always reminded that it's never as good as it feels. It's never as bad as it feels. So when I'm doing really well, I'm staying even keeled. I don't slack on my prospecting because I know that my success today is because of what I did 90 days ago. And I never lose sight of those principles because it's very easy to start coasting when things are going well.
Yeah, when you reference the idea of facing adversity and the fact that we don't control a lot, but then there's ways we can respond. It jogged my memory of when I was doing some research and I saw your tribute post to your brother's diagnosis. And I think that it can be so hard to show up real on social media. And as we said earlier, authentic. So I know that may be a really difficult topic to actually touch on specifically. A lot of people ask me about my brothers as well, because I've faced some adversity within our family. And so I know what that feels like. So what I'm really interested in though is why you posted that. Like, as you've become a content creator, why post something like that, and or how can you post that? Because a lot of people would be scared and would want to keep that a little bit private,
Yeah, I struggled with that decision. I really did. And for, days after my brother made it public, I wasn't going to be the one to drop that news publicly whenever he was ready. He did it. My parents did it. And I was sitting on it, because I looked at my brand and I'm like, this is my business brand. I don't really use social media personally. It's become business. And I asked my brother because I was like, hey, like, do you want this attention that it's going to bring? it wasn't about me. But at the same time, I do want everyone to know what I'm going through, and I want to be able to talk about it because I've learned a ton. And now it's part of every conversation I have. Like if I'm going to give a keynote on a stage, I'm going to talk about what I just went through with my brother and what I've learned from it, and what other people need to learn from it. And that's why, one of my favorite books was "You Need More Money" by Matt Monero, and it's a story of cancer and how it destroys a family and how much money you need to fight something like that. And the last thing you want to worry about is money in a time where you're just trying to fight for your life, put food on the table for your kids. You don't want to lose your house. You can't work. You're fighting for your life in the hospital. And that's just completely solidified my mission and why I want to talk about finance. And I want people to take this wealth thing seriously, because if you're relying on your active income, you are one tragedy away from losing everything. And that should be a big enough scare and reality for you to start it, taking this thing seriously. Like, is it hard to build the skills to be in sales or to create big income and then go make these investments? Yeah, it's hard. But, if you're misaligned and you finally get that car you want off your salary and you're making these payments, and then your mother goes through, something that requires money and you spent it on a car instead of being able to help her, that's a bill of regret I don't want anybody to ever experience. And fortunately, I didn't realize it. I was building wealth for selfish reasons. I was. And through this experience with my brother, I realized that there'd be no greater reward than to give away my wealth to make him better.
Wow.
And to be able to do something like that is it's a pretty amazing feeling.
It's really special. And I guess I'll just say that, I wish him as well as possible, and you and your family, and add that when I was looking through, like any good podcaster, I think I do my research, but I don't do too much of it. I could have went through 30 different reels on Instagram and, saw content about financial literacy and different things. But the real aspect of that was what really stood out and why I wanted to, even though it can be challenging, ask about it. So I appreciate you sharing that. Means a lot. When it comes to posting on socials in general, like to take some steps back, I'm sure a lot of people work in sales, in hedge funds, own companies, but they don't create content. So that aspect of just creating on socials and what allowed us to connect, like, why do you think you went and started building a social media brand versus staying offline? And the reason I ask is because for my newsletter, I publish weekly things that can help people entering the creator economy, maybe if they're scared, whether it's audio, video, writing, it doesn't really matter, but I create for the creators. And it's always nice to actually pull quotes from this show as opposed to just my own thoughts. So I'd love to know, a step back, like, why do you even create when you don't necessarily have to in those businesses?
Yeah, it's most people in this world do not have a social media presence for good reason. I mean, we've got major SEC regulations, 506c hedge funds. Like, we can't advertise. We're not registered investment advisors. I can't give investment advice. So it's a very fine line, and that's why most people in my space are not going to be found anywhere on social media. For me, it's because I started doing this in my old business. When at the food company, we launched a podcast. I was doing that every week for over a year, and we were chopping up the content, and it was for a different purpose. And then when I would go back and look at my Instagram, it was personal stuff, and then it was Heartland Foods, and I wasn't going to abandon that journey because I see the value in it. And again, like, it's just a relationships game. So, when most of my clients, I meet in person, right? They don't find me on social media, but there's a lot of people I'll meet in person that start following me on social media that eventually monetize into a client. So, I hated it in the beginning. Everybody does, right? If you think that there's something wrong with you because you're terrified to hit the live button, those feelings never go away. You just get more used to it. And again, like every level, the reason why you get to a higher level is because you're willing to experience that same feeling of being uncomfortable again, right? It doesn't change. You just get used to feeling that really uncomfortable, unsettling feeling of, all the imposter syndrome. Who am I to think that I should have a personal brand? Why would anybody want to listen to me? I'm just a guy. Like we all feel this stuff. But being authentic on social media, in the beginning, it's going to be muddy in the beginning. And this is why most people quit. You're going to have people that love it, that hate it, and then people that are like snarky. And then after a few months, all the haters are going to stop following you. They're going to go away, and you're going to start building a tribe of people who think like you, and just double down on your authenticity. And you turn around in a couple years, it's a wonderful community. So back to your question about my brother, I mean, the pouring out of support from people I don't even know was incredible. So yeah, I'm going to share every part of my journey. And same thing with my dog. We had to put my dog down that I've had for 11 years 2 weeks ago, It's just a lot of bad stuff happening all at the same time in our personal lives right now. And, like the world's changed. Social media is how most of us communicate now. So if I kept all that stuff to myself, I'd be going through it myself. And it does help, tell the world what you're going through, good and bad. And it'll actually weed out the people that you think care about you too.
That's a really good point that I hadn't really thought of in the moment, at least, is, actually, I interviewed a person yesterday who has the weight loss story of losing like 120 pounds in the last year, and his brand's grown like crazy, just exponential. But he too never planned on doing anything other than using it as an accountability partner. He's like, I expected to have one follower, and all of a sudden you have 100,000 or whatever. And of course, like he shared, 99% of people were awesome, but there was the 1% of the trolls. So I love what you said about weeding people out. And when you were sharing about how after a year or whatever, they're all kind of fading away, it reminds me of like, because I played football, I played hockey too as a kid, but in university played football, of like a kickoff return in a video game where you're like stiff arming one person, juking the next. And like, but it's like you do that for like an entire year on social media of like kind of figuring out your way to pay dirt when it comes to it. Were there like, you mentioned the idea of anti kind of mentors and stuff, and then good mentors, to me, another term is anti-hero and heroes. Like in the online space, when times were tough, maybe you felt like giving up or not posting. Do you think that it was just your background as an athlete and your mindset that you had already built that allowed you to hit post even though you felt awkward? Or were there other people that you looked up to in the industry as well?
Man, I just did what felt right to me. Some of this stuff, I'd stew on it for a couple days, not post it, and then like also like, do I really want to post something political or post something edgy? Do I want to stay Switzerland and like you think about all these things, and then you just have to execute on, whatever you think is the right path. And I guess it's been a blended approach. Yeah, I mean, I'll watch. I really audit my feed, right? Like I don't follow anything that isn't positive. So that's another big influence on you. Now that like look at your screen time app. Like it's big, right? Even if you're not consuming on the platform and you're creating, there's still going to be consuming in there. So auditing what's coming down that feed and making sure it serves you and pushes you. That's like having a mentor right there, right? Like if every other video on my Explore page is David Goggins and Ed Milet and Grant Cardone and all these guys, am I more likely to push forward? Absolutely. But in terms of, reverse mentor and mentor, I think of that more so through the lens of when I'm reading a book. So I'll give an example. Read The Millionaire Next Door, when I was younger, because I wanted to be a millionaire, right? And the information was statistics. Most millionaires never made a lot of money. In fact, most millionaires never even made 100 grand. They were just extremely frugal. And by percentage, there's more millionaires who did it over, 50 years than any other way. So the information was like kind of telling you like that's the path, but like I have billionaire dreams and that information's not going to get me to where I want to go. So it was like, okay, this might be great for somebody who wants to be the average millionaire, but I don't want to be the average millionaire. So I got rid of that information, move on to the next book, right? Lifestyle Investor by Justin, I'm forgetting his last name, but that was a big breakthrough for me. Investing for cash flow, for return of capital, so you can accelerate gains and compound this thing. Like that's like, okay, I can see a path to where I want to go with this strategy, right? So it's read it, comprehend it, and then does it get me to where I want to go?
That's really interesting that you bring that up because a huge theme of this show, hence the title, Just Keep Learning, is the concept of learning. And sometimes we get a bit meta as well because we talk about the topic of learning. Sometimes I don't really get to that because we're so often working through industry stuff and like specific connections to expertise and the types of things that we've talked about with sales and business and entrepreneurship and all of that. But actually talking about the concept of learning is what you really just shared there, especially in such a self-learning, kind of self-teaching sort of world. So I think that in and of itself is really powerful for people. One of the things that I saw you shared in your story today was a quote: "Don't live the same year 75 times and call it." We're going to have a mic drop moment somewhat soon, and I always share some theme questions that tie the episodes together. But I would love to ask about that you reshared to your stories today. What does that quote mean to you?
What it means to me is that when this thing's all said and done, I want to look back that I lived this thing, for good and bad. And, I used to be trying to engineer, again, watching my family make lots of money, lose lots of money. I wanted to engineer this perfect life where like I couldn't get hurt, where it was all going to be perfect. And, through this process, I've gotten to a point where I realize that none of us are getting out of this without losing money. None of us are getting out of this without getting hurt, scammed. People that you trust or that you've maybe known for 10 years are going to screw you over. All of these things are going to happen to you. But if you choose a life that is stable and predictable, you will never get to experience life for what it was meant to be experienced. So now, no matter what happens, if it's a horrible day, a great day, I am living life. Like I'm actually living it. And no year is going to be the same. It's crazy what we've done this year. I mean, left in industry, income to zero, other than my investments, active income to 7, and then maybe, something could go wrong and you lose it all and then you get to do it again. And what I've realized is that it's not a race, it's an experience. And we should all be less scared of going through life's experience.
It's beautiful. I always get confused between like analogy and metaphor and those kind of like actual English terms, but whatever. I love when people compare life to a video game and that sort of mentality of, getting to different levels. And then if you have to face a different boss or those kinds of things. So I think that's a good example of that. We've talked a lot about entrepreneurship, business, sales, family, sports, wellness, mindset, learning. When I bring up all those kind of keywords again, before we wrap, is there anything that you would feel like we left out if you didn't touch on?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the transitional character, and I heard Carlos Reyes say this on stage. Just Google transitional character. There's a BYU write up on what it is, but it's being the person in your family lineage that completely changes the course of your lineage, right? I mean, if you grew up middle class, odds are you're going to be middle class. If you grew up rich, you're going to be rich. And for me, it's about wherever I start, whatever benefits your parents or whatever generation you come from, they did everything they could to put you in a baseline position that was better than them. And for some of us, it's pretty crappy. For some of us, it's awesome. It's irrelevant. You, as a transitional character, have to take your starting point and be better than the people who came before you. And I feel like if you can do that, you'll feel like you lived a fulfilled life. And it doesn't mean better financially. It means maybe, your dad left your mom, you never knew who your dad was. Well, then, if it's important to you, be a great father. If it's having more money and being able to provide things to your parents, retire them, do something that they never were able to do, there's no greater reward than being able to provide things for other people that they couldn't provide for themselves. And that's what a transitional character does. And that's a principle that I'm going to live by. I'm going to be there in ways that people can't be there for themselves.
I took a moment to kind of like just reflect mid response from you there because our oldest daughter is adopted, a lot of trauma from a really young age. Um, it's interesting. A lot of adoptive kids don't bring these things up, but she does almost daily ask why she was abandoned, why her parents couldn't parent her, why um, they were sick, as she calls it, homeless and drug addicted and things like that. That she doesn't know the full details. She's 10, but she brings it up like every 24 hours, and it's impossible to explain the transitional elements that exist for her right now. She'll put them in perspective in different ways as she gets older. Um, but I got a little sidetracked when you were answering because I started thinking about Chloe and those kinds of things. And yeah, that's really powerful. I think that'll help a lot of people. Um, in terms of the theme questions, kind of rapid fire, but take them however you want. The first one is, what's one thing, might be off brand or whatever, but one thing that you yourself are learning right now?
I'm learning, man, I'm learning so many things, but the biggest thing that I'm learning right now is try to gain the wisdom in advance. When you have a normal day, I used to think like it has to be a great day to be a great day, but I had never really been through anything seriously difficult, and I didn't realize that. So the thing that I'm learning right now is that when you have a normal day, and how was your day? Most people, if it's mundane feeling, you're gonna be like, oh, it was okay, it was great, it was a decent day. That's actually a great day when you get to get through your day, and it's status quo per se because you're in a routine. That's actually the best part of life. You're doing what you should be doing. Things are going well, and there's no tragedy. When things are tragic in your life, it's impossible to have a great day. So I think having a lower expectation of what a great day is something that I'm learning right now. It's just when everyone's okay, that's a great day.
It's really a pretty popular quote that Gary Vee has shared. Like when if your sister's not dead today, then I'm having a great day. Like he shares that a lot. And then when I've gone through crazy things, it's been so weird to be like, well, now that's that, at least for today. It actually happened. So what is the quote that I live by now? And I was supposed to say funny. It's maybe a little deeper than funny, but it's like, it just reinforces that same perspective. It's like, well, tomorrow that crazy thing can't happen either, like, because it already happened yesterday. So it's really interesting. It still is a bit triggering to see when like someone like Gary Vee posts that like today's a great day because nothing happened to someone in your family, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, it actually did, and it really it's a really interesting thing that kind of swirls around in my mind about that mindset. But definitely, I think living with gratitude is how we need to operate no matter what the day is, for sure. So I appreciate that. And maybe that's what it is, because some people say learning like cooking or how to garden or box or something. So when it's a little deeper, maybe this is already it, but maybe framing it like this, it might be a bit different. The second question is, you are a very wise person, you have a lot of great advice to give, but if you could only choose one thing to leave the next generation in terms of advice, what would it be?
Ooh, might have me stumped on this one. One piece of advice for the next generation. I would say be kind. Something I learned from MD Motivator. He spoke at our boot camp, very, very powerful stuff, but you just never know what someone else is going through, and just be kind, even to people who seem to just be filled with anger. They're probably going through something. So I think we just need to be nicer and more understanding as a species, and just spread more love.
That's a big one. I mean, you kind of laughed early on, maybe thinking that it wasn't great advice, but I mean, I don't know that we could have better advice. I had Sister Helen Prejean in a previous episode. The movie Dead Man Walking is about her life. Since that Oscar-winning movie, she's had 12 more clients in the industry of supporting them on death row. And we talked a lot about that, how compassion needs to exist for everybody, not like a select few. It's hard for people to understand that, so that's good of you to have that as a value, for sure. If I give you the microphone and you get to be podcaster for the rest of this interview, what's a question that you would ask me?
I would ask you, what part of your story made you start this podcast and, want to bring knowledge to people. And obviously you wouldn't do it if you didn't care about people. So what caused you to do it?
What's very in the moment about that question is I was watching with my wife The Bear on Disney last night, the TV series, and there was a moment in the show, and I took a screenshot of it because I was like, oh, I'm going to write a thread about this topic. And they were in the restaurant industry talking about the word hospitality and how both hospitals and restaurants are basically the same. And the one dude was like, no, they're not. And he was like, yeah, that's why we both use the term hospitality, because we're here to serve people. I do feel like that's why I'm doing it. But for me, there's like a more practical background. And it's that I also, similar to Sister Helen, was working in jails. And in jails, they can't, in my case, use YouTube or anything like that. They also have backgrounds where they were into things like human trafficking, dealing drugs, being hitmen, and they've seen like $1 million cash, something I've never seen. They grew up generationally learning how to operate in gangs and stuff. They have crazy transferable skills that they don't believe they can pivot to the real world. Speaking of sales and just surviving, like those types of things are so powerful that if they could learn from great people like yourself and the other guests we've had, some of the things that aren't scalable for me, like a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I want to start a podcast, I want to start a YouTube channel, I want to be a hip hop artist, I want to start a hoodie brand, or I want to get into investing, real estate. I can't possibly know everything. So my way to attack that from a place of serving was using the podcast.
That's great.
And they're allowed to use MP3s, right? Like in that case, they can download. It's not connected to the world, so they can use that as a way to learn. The funny thing is, it actually impacts negatively downloads, because like you download one, like my podcast is shared a lot of times offline, which to me, because of the purpose of it, that doesn't really matter anyways. But yeah, it's all good. Thank you for asking. And the last question is the classic why, which is a little bit of a wrinkle. And where can people find you online?
Why? That's a new one. Never been asked